Hello and welcome. And today I'm very pleased to be joined by Professor Alisoun Milne and Professor Mary Larkin. And we're going to be talking about something which I think is hugely important to all of us, which is about carers in society. We may not think it affects us, but this subject has far-reaching consequences and impact on both us personally and socially and politically. And I think the ramifications are huge for our society and our economy. And it's something that we are going to discuss today. And I think it's something that we should all be involved in the subject. And this came about from reading, and I've got lots of yellow stickers here, on both of the professors' book, Family Carers and Caring. So what I'd like to do is welcome both Alisoun and Mary and ask them to introduce themselves.
Certainly, great to be here, Katrina, and thank you very much indeed for inviting us to be interviewed about our book, which we're passionate about. So my name's Alisoun Milne, and I'm Professor of Social Work and Social Gerontology at the University of Kent, and have done research and writing on carers and caring for many a long year, along with other things.
Hi, I'm Professor Mary Larkin, Professor of Care, Carers and Caring at the Open University. I too am delighted to have this opportunity to do this podcast today. I've many years' experience of working in care research and working with carers and carers organisations. I've also worked with a number of national and international bodies, and I've tried to use my teaching too to develop develop courses about carers in higher education, and also to develop opportunities for carers to enter into higher education and support carers in higher education. I've spearheaded several initiatives at the Open University to support students and a bursary scheme to enable students to be funded to study at the Open University.
So one of my first questions is going to be, why did you write the book? And before I ask you to answer that, what I would like to say is that I never thought that reading a book that actually is very dry in content and matter could actually make me feel like, oh, something needs to be done. So, well, and presumably that's why you wrote the book.
Yeah, yes, in good part, it is really. One of the key drivers for writing the book was our shared passion and interest in the subject of family carers and caring. And also because there's a lot of work on family carers and caring out there in the big world. Lots of journal papers, lots of reports, lots of books, quite a lot of what's called grey literature, which is organisations like Carers UK and the Carers Trust, charities, writing about carers and reporting on numbers and profiles and statistics. But it hasn't, up until now, we think anyway, all been drawn together into a single place. So our aim was to write an accessible text, and I'm pleased to hear that you found it so, but also academically informed, bringing together issues from policy, from practice, from services, from academic literature, from conceptual perspectives and understanding of carers and caring into a single text. It's worth saying that the book belongs to a suite of books that Emerald Publishing published under the umbrella of a called Society Now. It's a book series called Society Now, and Society Now is really books about contemporary issues of interest to the general public, contemporary social issues. They approached me in about 2017 at a conference and asked me, would I be interested in writing something on family carers and caring, which I'm sure we'll all agree is an issue of contemporary public interest. And I said, yes, I would, although not at that moment. And I had two conditions, which was give me time and can I please write it with my friend and colleague, Mary Larkin? And they said yes to both of those. So that's a little bit about the history. But it is just worth reiterating that not only are we passionate about the subject, I think we do know a little bit as well, both from personal experience and as academics, but we're also very committed to issues of social justice and inequality. So we've threaded those issues through the book. I think
that's very apparent as you read through the book.
And also we wanted to consolidate knowledge about carers for the general public. Because I mean, as you indicated, you had a bit of an understanding, but we're reading the book, it's really developed that understanding much more. So it was to give people that more holistic understanding of carers that you couldn't pick up just from reading general newspaper articles or keeping up with the news. So we hope it achieves that objectives too.
Absolutely. And I was, sorry, Alison.
I was going to say that it is just worth reiterating that the whole series is pitched at a broad church. So the book is not for undergraduates, although there is no reason why an undergraduate audience or even a postgraduate audience wouldn't be interested. But it is really for people such as yourselves to get this rounded perspective. So it is really pitched at the general public.
Absolutely. And I think one of the one thing that I found really interesting, I mean, first of all, I like the way you kind of basically held my hand from the very beginning of, you know, which is what is a carer. I think we all have our own, you know, preconceptions of what a carer might be. I personally haven't really had to care for anyone, but well, although having said that, which is interesting in your book, is that how one defines oneself if you're a carer or not. You could well be caring, but you don't define yourself as a carer. So, you know, perhaps you'd like to tell us what is a definition of a carer and how much does it expand? You know, how, you know, what are the stats?
I mean, I'll just start off, if I may. It's that they're seductively simple concepts: care, carer, caring. That they're both very complex, and as I just said, they're quite simple. They appear to be quite simple concepts, but they often defy definition and capture. Caring, of course, is about an emotion, isn't it? You care for someone, you care about a person, and caring is also about action. So people who tend to care about a relative are often the people that end up caring for that relative. So it's both an emotion and a task or a role. So it straddles both those domains. Often caring is also embedded in a relationship. So, you know, 9 times out of 10, somebody is a close relative, particularly those people that do more intensive caring, often a husband or a wife or a parent, for example, of a disabled child. In the book, we did adopt a specific definition, and that's a definition that the Carers Trust developed some years ago, which is anyone who cares unpaid for a friend or family member who, due to illness, disability, a mental health problem, or an addiction, cannot cope without their support. That is by no means a definition that encompasses all carers, but it probably encompasses the majority, and we kind of felt we had to sort of boundary our book in some shape or form. We don't really talk about paid carers. I mean, just to be very clear about that, the book is about family/unpaid carers. We do talk about it a little bit, but the book's focus is really on unpaid caring. And you've already also highlighted one of the challenges of even beginning to talk about carers, which is that quite a lot of carers, particularly older carers and spouse carers, although it could be true for many others too, do not see themselves as carers. They would never define themselves or label themselves as a carer because it would just be antithetical to the nature of the relationship they've got with the person they're looking after. So yeah, that it is true. The other thing about caring is, of course, it shifts through time. So it's not, generally speaking, one's not a carer on a Monday and is a carer on a Tuesday. People usually gradually develop into becoming a carer over time, picking up more challenging tasks as the needs of the person they're looking after often deteriorate or worsen.
And also, I'd just like to link that to the point that, you know, if we accept that we all care for one another, we've all got people we care for and who care for us in our families, our friendships, and our communities. We'll all need care sooner or later, or most of us will, because life sends us various illnesses and adversities to cope with. In a sense, everyone is a carer, and that is borne out in some of the statistics that are available, in that 60% of us will actually be a carer at some point in our lives.
Yeah, and I think that was the bit that I was very interested in the book. I was like, and that's why in my introduction I was saying that most of us will be a carer at some point.
60%, yeah.
It's just huge. And I think you're absolutely right about whether you identify yourself as a carer or not, which sort of probably then leads on to the impact of, you know, the relationship of, you know, when you are a carer, what happens?
Well, there's various impacts, but could I just take a step back and talk about how many carers we've got currently
Oh, yeah,
caring,
please
and what
do.
the statistics say? Because you've referred to that statistic that 60% of us will be a carer at some point in our lives, but at the moment it's estimated that 15% of the population are currently caring. And that's compared with 2011, when only 2% of the population are caring. So more and more of us are being a carer, and also more and more of us, and that'll go on, and more of us having to do really much more complex tasks as carers, in addition to tasks we do, carers do normally, like personal care, managing all the finances, arranging the medical appointments, those sort of things. The move to more care at home means that carers are having to administer injections, change dressings, even do home dialysis in some cases. So there's more and more, not only is there a greater demand for carers, but there's also more demands on carers, and that won't change because of the trend to more care at home.
And I mean, well, I know we will move on to the social justice or the reasoning as to why we are having to do more care in a moment. But
Yeah.
sort of going back more to I want to sort of rein it in more to the personal side of, you know, when you find yourself to be a carer in that position, how do you, you know, in the research you've done, what have you found that people say, how that affects them?
Well, research shows there are a number of impacts on carers, and obviously it depends on the intensity of caring. But if you think at the moment, 50% of carers care for more than 20 hours a week, which is a lot of hours on top of other commitments you have to do. Also, that the peak age for being a carer is aged between 50 and 64. With 1 in 5 people in that age group being a carer, those people are more likely to be developing health issues themselves. So linking that to the point about the impacts of caring, it's been found that many carers, particularly those who do have high levels of caring, find it very difficult to juggle work and employment, and sometimes it's actually overwhelming. Apparently 2.1 million people each year reduce their working hours in order to care, and 2.6 million actually give up their work to care. So it has a huge impact on employment. So not only does that impact on a personal level, but it can lead to what are often difficult financial situations for carers. About 39% of carers saying they're struggling to make ends meet. They do qualify for what's called carers allowance, but the eligibility criteria are quite selective, and many carers actually don't qualify, and it's not a particularly high sum anyhow. But the data does show that because carers face such a lot of financial hardship, they often cut back on spending on essentials like food and heating. They cut back on their social activities. It means they have to draw down on their savings and use their bank account overdrafts. And around 21% report that they're actually in debt, and they've fallen into arrears with their utility bills and mortgages and housing costs and those sort of things. So that obviously there's huge strains associated with being a carer, and these obviously and the stress that's associated with it too. Obviously, this does have an impact on carers' health. And because of the pressures on them, they don't get the time they need for healthy living, like exercising. They also may have reduced opportunities to have their own lives outside carers, outside caring, and actually to have a life outside caring. And because caring eats into the time they've got to devote to friends, many report that they are lonely as well. So it's not surprising to find out that carers are 50% more likely to report that they've got poor physical and psychological well-being than non-carers, and 63% of them had at least one long-term health condition, disability or illness, compared to 50% of non-carers, and a quarter are in receipt of disability living allowance. And the sort of physical health issues they have are musculoskeletal and back problems, like arthritis, heart disease, exhaustion, skin disorders, high blood pressure, a whole range of illnesses. And in terms of psychological morbidity, carers are nearly twice as likely to suffer from depression and anxiety than non-carers. And very sadly, there's an emerging body of international evidence that suggests that carers may be a high-risk group for suicide too.
Gosh, I mean, when I read that in your book about the list of issues that carers, and you feel like saying, oh my God, well, who's going to care for the carers? I mean, it just sort of seems to sort of spiral on. And one of the things that the book also covers is that the changing dynamic of the relationship between if it's I was going to say mother-daughter, and I've obviously made that into a male-female thing, and the stats show that clearly it is still the female that is predominantly the carer.
Yeah, 60% are female.
Certainly in midlife, it's not so true for older carers. It's about half and half. So for older couples,
on average, it's 60% overall. 60%
overall,
are women. Yes, yeah.
And I suppose that's also when people get older, if it's a couple looking after
that's right.
themselves, it depends who needs more caring, etc.
Yes, I mean you've hit on another issue though, which is that who this idea that there's a sort of patient or a service user and a carer, when actually with older people in particular, quite often it's a couple who are sort of supporting one another, kind of rubbing along, okay, but perhaps one partner's got dementia, the other partner's physically frail, and they sort of manage. And there's no way that couple are going to be talking about defining themselves as carers, anytime soon, particularly when in fact they're sort of caring for one another. So the sort of way that we think about it is often quite narrow and quite unhelpful, because it doesn't really fit with how people's lives operate. And as I said earlier, at what point do you, even if you're willing to accept you might become a carer, which is what you were talking about between a daughter might, it happened to me with my own mother. At one point I did think, I think I probably am a carer now. How that then undermines or corrupts or damages or at least changes the relationship between you as a daughter and with your mother. I mean, I think you either protect it by sort of help, if you've got enough money, you can buy in some support, or other family members can pitch in and help. But you're right, it changes the way that you then relate to and how you identify with that.
I'd like to come in there about the increasing number of older carers, because those carers are all likely to have pre-existing health conditions themselves, which makes it extra hard to care. And also because we all live so much longer, and it means that you might, if you're a daughter, as Alison's referring to, you might be caring for an elderly parent or parents, but also you care for the younger generation too. There's an increasing number of people who are called sandwich carers, who are literally caring for two generations, and it's usually midlife women who do
nearly all women. That's nearly all women.
Yeah.
I mean, I was pleased to see that obviously the workplace is trying to push forward some more initiatives and recognizing the importance of recognizing that there is a requirement that people are pulled between, especially the sandwich carers, that recognizing it, and the, you know, the positivity that if you look after those workers, you are rewarded tenfold by how loyal they are to you, because people recognize.
Yeah, because I mean, so many, because of the average age caring hits people. I mean, we're not denying that 2% of carers are under 18. You know, people do care when they're younger. Yet for employers, you're losing people at their peak in the terms of their skill set too.
Absolutely, and especially now, you know, you're saying about most people are between 55 to 64. You know, and the workplace, people are having to work financially. They have to work longer anyway.
That's right. So you're quite right. We have greater expectations of family carers. People are going to have to work for longer. So in a way, the employment context is pretty important in terms of thinking about carers. You said just now that employers are beginning to sort of wake up and smell the coffee, as it were. I mean, I think it's a very mixed bag, Katrina. I mean, I think there are definitely some employers who are obviously, you know, approachable. People feel they can talk to their managers, that they've got that sort of supportive relationship. But it depends on this individual relationship, really, with your manager. And I mean, it means that it's a very uneven sort of experience for employees. Would you agree with that, Mary?
Well, yes, it's still uneven, but I don't want to undermine what is going on, because people like Employers for Carers, that is part of Carers UK, are making huge strides in terms of working with organisations to support carers, and put a lot of resources into that. But I do agree, when it comes down to it, it's your line manager, because this is what's come out in work I've done, in that if the line manager isn't supporting you in what you're doing, and particularly if it's a small organisation, it's much easier for bigger organisations to implement carer-friendly policies, because you've got you know, it's on a scale. Yeah, that there are several factors that mitigate against what's going on, but I genuinely believe we are working more generally to supporting carers at work.
I want to make two more points. One is, imagine for a second that you getting parental leave depended on the goodwill of your employer. Now, at the moment, you don't have to depend on the goodwill of your employer, because you have a right to it. And I think that is the status that we think carers leave. Carers. Yeah. That's what it needs to be elevated to that level of societal, legal, and sort of policy acceptability, given that, as you said earlier, Katrina and Mary, both of you, that there's going to be more and more people in this pinch point situation where they've got the pressure of being a carer and the pressure of having to work for longer often. We really need to begin to think about, well, hang on a minute, we've kind of done it for parents. Now, a lot of parents are probably saying, gosh, hardly at all. True. I'm not sharing much of the parental load with you, but at least you have had for some long time, certainly in most of my adult life, the right to at least maternity leave when I was younger. Now it's parental leave. The second point I want to make is about one of the reasons that carers are being expected to do more and more and more is because the state, and by that I mean social care services and funded welfare services and the NHS as well, are doing less and less. So, I mean, carers are expected to pick up the carer tab, if you like, for the absences left, the big holes left by services. So it is a perfect storm in many ways for families. Fewer people who are, quote, eligible to be carers. You may have one daughter who lives in Australia, you know, or one daughter who's working full time who has teenage children to look after. You know, we've got more older people, also more younger adults and middle-aged people with long-term conditions that require care, and also children. And we've got and very few services, reduced numbers of services. So for both, by the way, the person with the care needs and for the carer.
I'd like to add to that discussion that we've got the family itself is changing. People having fewer children or deciding not to have children altogether. and obviously increasing divorce and families breaking up means that links with some parents become more tenuous. So you haven't had that relationship on which to actually build a caring relationship when the time comes.
But can we also say that there is no evidence that people are doing less caring? There's
No.
a sort of fantasy.
No, but the less carers, what I mean is
there are
that
fewer people doing more, aren't there?
yeah,
Basically.
exactly, yeah.
There's this sort of idea that there's this sort of there are people out there who just aren't doing what their duty as carers, and there's practically no evidence for this whatsoever, that middle-aged women in particular, but lots of people in families are doing all that they reasonably can to look after their relatives.
I mean, I think the thing would be naturally now to go on to the social justice side of it, which sort of wraps into, my question would be, why are we doing care and sort of looking towards the institutions that when I was younger, if people were ill, they went into an institution, or it was just assumed that, somebody else was going to care for them. So do you want to pick that one up, Alison?
Yes, certainly. I mean, I think the institutional issue intersects, as Mary said at the beginning of our discussion, fewer and fewer people are actually going into long-term care. Only 6% of older people live in care homes, which when I say this to social work students, they're shocked. They think, in their head, they think it's like vast. Of course, it's a large total number. And we want to celebrate the fact that people are not, going into care homes, particularly when they don't want to go in. But at the same time, we've ended up with people living in the community being looked after by extremely stressed elderly carers, and there's a balance to be struck there. I mean, we do argue in the book that the family care is squarely an issue of social justice. Mary's described the ways already in which carers are profoundly disadvantaged. They get benefits, by the way, too, from being carers. But just to reiterate the fact that, people who care, particularly over the long term, for somebody with a complex healthcare need, many have to give up their jobs. We've heard about that. They're often made ill or made more ill by demanding care tasks. Many live in poverty or on the edges of poverty. And what carers often talk about is living these terribly restricted lives. I feel I'm trapped by caring. I can't go out and live a life, as Mary said earlier. Many carers don't identify as a carer. We've already discussed this. And the sort of separation issue between carer and user as well is a complex one. It's not straightforward. So we think that at the moment the discourse is very much located in what's called the welfare paradigm. So what we need to do is get more support from carers. We think so too. We strongly agree with the fact that carers need more support. But we think that actually caring needs to be pushed up the political agenda. We need to start talking more about care as an issue of social justice. That it needs to be at the core of policy making, not on its edges. That policy and services need to think about the lives and welfare of carers before carers reach a crisis point. Many carers talk about just collapsing and then they might get some care. But at the moment, they have to work so hard to get even a tiny amount of support from either the NHS or social care services. Most carers want to care. They want to care. What they want to do is share it with the welfare state. And at the moment, there's almost no opportunity for them to do that. Welfare benefits are very low. It's one of the lowest benefits carers allowance. So it feels to us very much as if care needs to be elevated or located more in the social justice paradigm, that carers need rights as well as recognition and social justice as well as support.
And I think that's really going to get elevated when people suddenly realise. So, for example, my generation, we have a lot of money that's invested in our houses. And when we sell our houses, that's what's paying for our care. But that's not going to go down the scale. So what happens then? I mean, it's absolutely terrifying. I mean, I'm amazed that, you're saying about 6% of people being in care, but people won't be able to afford for the care. It is just ridiculous.
It's true. I mean, I think there are some really big financial challenges around the corner. You're right. We are predicating policy on a number of issues. One is the assumption that there will be family carers there to pick up the care tab. And as Mary said, with growing numbers of people having either one child or no children, any assumption based on this notion that there is a family to do this is immediately going to fail. The other assumption is that there are people out there with money. Of course, there are still quite a lot of us out there with houses to sell, and certainly carers with money who can buy in care for their relative would certainly say, yes, thank God I've got some money. At least I can afford to buy some private home care.
I mean, what Alison's saying, it intersects with the paid care sector, doesn't it? Because there's all the debates at the moment about the changes to migration that will have a huge impact on the care sector. And vacancy rates are something like 20% in the care sector at the moment. So we talk about being able to stay in your own home and have care, but it depends on that paid care market so much.
Absolutely.
So just to finish, Katrina, on the social justice argument, I guess what we're saying is that we think a lot of the problems that carers face are preventable. That someone getting ill, becoming poor, having to give up work, they are preventable. But we need a strategy, a political and policy strategy that will actually prevent carers having to privately bear almost all the responsibilities for caring. It needs to be shared to a much greater degree with policymakers, with services, and with the community and society.
I mean, and the thing that I hear what Alison's saying completely. The thing that concerns me and continues as concerned me for some time is that it needs to be a non-party issue, because you get one party in who's pro-carer or says they're pro-carer, and then they don't do it, then they disappear. You get a minister who's very pro-carer, they get moved on. We all know how quickly ministers get moved on these days. So I can't say I've got an answer, but I just think there needs to be either a body that's got a power to introduce change, or a particular non-political person who can lead on carers in the government. As I say, I don't know what structure could be put in place for that, but I just strongly feel it shouldn't be left just to politicians.
Well, it should be whoever looks after the NHS properly as well. I mean, it's the same argument for the NHS to come out of that. It can't be a 5-year window of whatever your policies are, because we're talking very long term.
Well, it's even worse than that, really, because carers come under this amorphous and opaque umbrella of social care. And we haven't got time today to discuss all the ins and outs of that. But at the moment, for a carer to access support for themselves, unless they are going to buy it for themselves, they need to go to the local authority, or go straight to a third sector carers organisation that often is commissioned by or has some funding from the local authority to join a carers group, for example. And by the way, we both have a very high opinion of third sector carers organisations. They are the people that really keep carers going, actually, in most parts of the UK.
And they fight whatever the political parties in power.
They do whatever they can to elevate the role and status of carers. But I think both Mary and I were part of a cross-independent body called the Standing Commission on Carers, which was set up by the Blair government. And that did have quite a lot of influence, actually, and it was a mixture of people on this body, and it was chaired by a brilliant woman called Dame Philippa Russell for most of its life, and it did have quite a lot. It could command quite a lot of influence inside Downing Street and penetrated the civil service. In fact, there were civil servants who were part of the committee, and it was very much apolitical, but it had a clear, if you like, political with a small p, pro-carer, elevating the status and role. And it basically was there to make sure that carers were put squarely inside the policy-making machine. And it was pretty effective at that.
Yeah, but it was set up in the Blair-Brown years, and I know Brown was very supportive of it. Then it was dissolved in the Conservative years. Yeah.
So to sort of wrap up this session, because I know that we all feel quite animated in how we can progress it. And, I think your aim of your book was to pull everything together, which you've done very distinctly. That's the word, isn't it? Pulled it together very well for us to then look at the evidence. And it's like, so how do we move forward? How would you, in an ideal world, move this forward?
Well, I've got a couple of thoughts. I mean, one of them is, I mean, I agree and I don't agree with you, Mary, about the political leadership. I think carers and caring as an issue does need to be squarely located in the political realm. It shouldn't depend on an individual leader or an individual politician, but it needs to be there. It needs to be much more visible and there. And the second thing I was to say is we just need to be much more able to think about caring as something that affects all of us. It is going to come whether you like it or not. Either you are going to become a carer yourself or you are going to need care, and quite possibly both of those things. And I think we need a properly funded welfare state. We hear about innovation, we hear about sexy ways in which we can support carers. Most carers say, what I want is reliable, timely, accessible, easy to understand ways to get support for the person I look after and myself. I don't want to necessarily not care. I probably want to carry on caring, but I'd like to share it with services that I can actually access without absolutely tying myself up in knots or having to pay a huge amount of money for it.
Yeah, I want to go back on the point about political. What I mean is it shouldn't be affiliated to a particular political party. I think it's a political issue, but
Exactly, Mary.
the trouble has happened. What's happened where progress has been hampered because we were affiliated to particular political parties. Yeah, and just to add to Alison's point, I've got a couple of points. I feel that in relation to carers finding their way around health and social care, we need to think about having a named professional who's got all that expertise that can help them find their way around health and social care, knows what the benefits are, knows what services are. At the moment they just feel totally lost about, and then staff change because the social work staff turnover is high as well. And I think there's something we can all do too. And this is what I said in my inaugural, and that's what's hearing you speak about our book, Catriona, is heartwarming, because we can all use our knowledge to keep raising the profile of carers. I mean, you can go on the Carers Trust or Carers UK websites and see what campaigns they're support their campaigns. There's many local carers centres have fundraising activities, see what's going on in your local community. And also just by having discussions with people, information is useful at all sorts of levels. I mean, since my inaugural, when I talked about this sort of information, I've had several people come to me and say, I just never knew that. I'm now much more aware, and they're asking questions. So you can get people thinking as well. And I think this is what the great thing about this book, it'll get more people thinking, and they feel they're armed with information that they can discuss and use in arguments that they're having as well.
And the other thing I want to say is, and this is one of the quotes that you actually used in your inaugural lecture, Mary, is that right up here in the policy stratosphere are lots of ambitions for carers to be recognised, to have a life outside care and to have their health protected. But down in the very impoverished world of the local authority, there's very little money. There's very little, a very little.
They're going bankrupt.
They're going bankrupt. So
Yes.
so it's sort of joining up the dots. It's no point in having abstract goals if when they are filtered through a cash-strapped local authority, what comes out is £2.50 sort of thing. If we actually mean what we say in policy, then we have to pay. We have to fund properly funded welfare services and properly funded welfare benefits as well.
Yeah. And supporting carers costs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's probably the hub of all of this, isn't it? Which is where it started off, the government slowly withdrawing money from.
But of course, it costs to not support them. And you started off with this, Catriona. You said, well, hang on a minute. Carers are now they're getting ill, they're falling off, they're falling down, they have to leave work. So at the moment, the costs are being borne by carers. They're being borne by carers and the people they're looking after, who then sometimes have to go into a care home. So it might cost to support them, but it's costing a huge amount of money and a huge amount of personal pain and health. At the moment, we're sacrificing carers, basically.
We don't, it's hidden costs.
Hidden, privatized costs.
So I think to wrap that up, because I think we're all in huge agreement with each other on the subject, and hopefully we've raised some questions for people to have a think about, and maybe, you know, as Mary said, to be aware, have a look at your local authorities or your local charity outlets to see where maybe you can go and understand and support them as well, to push the message higher up the chain. So thank you both very much. It's been very enlightening. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Nice to meet you.
Thank you for the opportunity.